Try to touch in a way that is gliding. Notice how you are touching. Try to touch in a way that is prickly. Notice how you're touching. Try to touch in a way that is aggressive. Notice how you're touching. Try to touch in a way that is accidental. Notice how you're touching.
Try it in a way that is upside down. Try it in a way that is
dry.
Dry.
And then let's try it in a way that is let's try it in a way that is
autonomous.
Autonomous.
I'm looking for creaks in the floorboards.
I'm heavy today.
And messy.
Cornered.
Cornered.
I like how the wall is cold. It's refreshing. It's kind of hot inside.
Oh.
Got my fingers taped together.
Mm-hmm.
Balancing.
Mm.
Rotating.
Spooning.
Bending.
Breaking.
Under the table.
Dusting.
At least for me, at first thing that came to my mind is surfaces, but when even if you try to touch things that are considered to be more two-dimensional, like the wall, you realize that it's always three-dimensional. My first thought conceptually before the embodied experience was that touch is always about surfaces and it's something more superficial. But even in the metaphor of language, we say we are get touched, and it's always something deep. So this is something that I found interesting, this difference between surfaces, the superficial touch between two-dimensional, and this touch that somehow has a volume or expands in time and as an experience.
Surface, unlike how you never actually touch anything. I've always been really interested in the like the particle science when it gets really down to it. And it's like, so yes, you're touching your shoes, but you're not ever touching your shoes. And, it's like, so then in a way, as I'm touching the air and the space, like by extension, I'm actually literally touching all of you through some amount of particles in space. And so it's really like touch is, if we go away from all those beautiful definitions, it's actually just a shortening of the space between us. And even like allowing our brains to conceive of it differently, like the space between us. So I'm very interested in that. And when I was going on my journey, I also was inhabiting some substances. There was some water involved by necessity. And so then I started to think about how touch changes when the particles between us or between what you're touching change and change your conception of what is touch. Like, is it always skin? Yeah, and then all of these different types of fluid and particles and air and everything I got really excited about as I was taking my time. Yeah.
I remember when I was learning Spanish, this was really special when you hear to play the guitar is also to touch the guitar, right? And there's a way that you know, it's almost as if it's a stockpile of inanimate potential waiting to be animated, right? To infuse with your creativity or whatever. But it also goes the other way, you know, it has a certain stockpile of potential. It's a certain kind of, the object is a certain limitation in the world or a certain individuation of matter in the world.
I experimented also a lot with this temperature, as I said, and this is also, you have somehow, even if you touch inanimate objects, it's like, there's always this question, if, do I touch this surface or am I touched by this surface? You kind of have the feeling that we touch, to get touched, there's always a change after this experience.
I was thinking about fidgeting. It's one of the things I fidget with sometimes. And so I strapped some markers to it and I made it draw. I had a lot of fun. But yeah, it was sort of like, I was just thinking about how, you know, what are the kinds of traces of fidgeting movement.
There's a couple interesting questions. So Nina, you're asking about a definition of fidgeting, curious about that. And if it's touch, so what touches with that intention? That's interesting to think about.
Yeah, somebody said accidental touch or something in the, and that made me think of it. Maybe that was actually you, Garrett, I don't know. That's an interesting space to be thinking about in this kind of activity, you know? Fulfilling some kind of touch need that you're not even sure why you need it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's probably a whole interesting psychoanalysis of fidgeting, right? In traditional schooling pedagogy, you know, fidgeting's bad, right? It's like undesirable because, you know, it means you're not focused or something, or you're of course not performing focus in some sort of way. And in special ed environments, people find that, yeah, fidgets and like fidget devices are extremely useful, right? And you know, people couple with them in different ways. So yeah, I mean, it's regarding intention. Yeah, I don't know. It certainly problematizes what we think of as intention, and like what kind of assumptions are baked into intention.
Yeah, totally. Or like efficiency kind of models, and yeah, capitalism in a lot of ways. Yep, totally.
Like, is fidgeting touch as personal ritual? At least my own fidgeting has quite an intention, just like you were saying, like one that isn't highly recognized in normative forms. So that I was like, so what is the intention? It's very personal and it's very personally supportive, but maybe not always recognized as such.
Yeah, great point.
So what I need is kind of alteration in the space around me. That's my first intention, is I want to probably move things, break things. I want to disrupt the order that I'm sensing right now. So I'm not comfortable with what's happening now. At the same time, this is soft and it goes back to the previous position. So it gives me a feeling that after I make this impulse and I waste my energy, he is still with me. I can feel it coming back, touching my hand, and still kind of softening what I was doing before, that was giving a big squeeze to it. I start looking around my desk, that it's here, and I have things like this, which is a notebook, mouse, moisturizing cream, another notebooks, pens, and so on. And I wondered, why don't I need to squeeze all these other objects? Because at first, most of them will not go back to their previous order before I squeeze them. So I'm kind of altering the physical surrounding. That's what I do not want. I just want to give that energy spike in an immediate response and then go back to my previous state. And I start feeling, how does it feel on my hand to squeeze other objects? And this is obviously the one that makes me feel good. So at the end, probably I was only simplifying. Probably I just want to feel good. That's the main reason why I squeeze this object. It involves my hand, it is soft, and it interacts with me all the time. If I squeeze this notebook, I will probably rip some of the sheets. It will not feel pleasant, and it will not go back to the first position. So then I start wondering in my mind, how do we feel good by touching things in the cities that we live or in the neighborhoods that we live? How many physical good sensations do we feel by touching different textures, touching different objects in the cities that we live? And I finally realized that nowadays we feel much less, so we kind of avoid touching things, and we are losing this sense of interaction with the city that we live in.
It seems like fidget time, it's almost like the way that Brian Asumi, who's written about affect, the way that he sort of describes that zone of the affect, which is like somehow before thought and like before recognition, sort of like it's in the nooks and crannies, right? So it's not like a duration. It's like, oh yeah, it's like 1 minute. But about something which is like always kind of like re-ingressing into the experience of time, right? I find myself, here touching with this thing, right? Moving this thing around, right? Like that. I'm also reminded, somebody said recently, reminded me that, what is it? The body is like 100 milliseconds ahead of the mind, or, some constellation like this. I mean, okay, body and mind and all these things are really complicated. And yet, I'm always sort of reminded of that gap when I'm doing this sort of fidgeting, right? Likewise, if you have a bad habit like me, sometimes I chew on my fingers, and it's not so much. It's interesting because it's not so much a question of willpower, right? Like, oh yeah, I must be strong and not bite my fingers. It's actually that I'm already chewing on my fingers before will even enters in, right? So it sort of also gives a different temporality of intention too.
With cities, for example, we don't know in 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, what will be the cultural response of touching a door, of touching elevator button. And we are kind of still moving in these cultural behaviors. And as we don't know, uncertainty grows, and how will touch be affected by it? Will we give more meaning to the touch we have at home, for example? So for me, it's much more unknown. That's why it arises a sense of fear.